The Northwest Indian War was a pivotal yet often overlooked conflict that shaped America's destiny. It marked a defining moment in the struggle for control of the continent, pitting Native American confederacies against the fledgling United States. The war's legacy would forever alter the course of American history, igniting a fire of resistance that would burn for generations to come. As the ink dried on the Treaty of Paris in 1783, marking the official end of the American Revolutionary War, a new era of conflict began to take shape in the Northwest Territory. The treaty, which recognized American independence from Britain, also granted the United States claim to a vast territory west of the Appalachian Mountains, including the coveted lands that would eventually become Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. However, this newfound territorial ambition was not without its challenges, as British forces continued to occupy strategic frontier posts despite their treaty obligations to vacate them. The British retention of these posts, including Fort Detroit, Fort Michilimackinac, and Fort Niagara, was a deliberate attempt to maintain influence over the region and protect their Native American allies. This move was deeply troubling for American leaders, who saw it as a direct challenge to their authority and a potential catalyst for further conflict. Meanwhile, Native American leaders, who had fought alongside the British during the Revolutionary War, were excluded from the peace negotiations, leaving them feeling betrayed and disenfranchised. In the face of this growing instability, a powerful Native American confederacy began to take shape under the leadership of two visionary warriors, Little Turtle of the Miami tribe and Blue Jacket of the Shawnee. These skilled military strategists recognized that their only hope for resisting American expansion lay in unity and collective action. Throughout 1784 and 1785, they worked tirelessly to forge alliances between various Native American tribes, including the Miami, Shawnee, Delaware, and Wyandot, with the aim of creating a formidable Western Confederacy. As the Western Confederacy began to coalesce, its leaders cleverly exploited the tensions between American settlers and British authorities. They played on British sympathies, emphasizing their shared interests in resisting American expansion, while also maneuvering to secure support from other European powers such as Spain and France. Little Turtle and Blue Jacket understood that their struggle was not just about defending Native American lands, but also about preserving a way of life that was rapidly being eroded by the encroaching tide of American settlement. The formation of the Western Confederacy marked a significant turning point in the Northwest Indian War, as it brought together a diverse array of Native American tribes under a unified leadership. This newfound cohesion would ultimately pose a formidable challenge to American forces, who were still reeling from the aftermath of the Revolutionary War. As the seeds of conflict continued to germinate, the stage was set for a protracted and bloody struggle that would test the mettle of both Native American warriors and American soldiers, shaping the course of American history in ways that would be felt for generations to come. As the Western Confederacy continued to consolidate its power, American leaders attempted to assert their claim to the Northwest Territory through diplomatic means. In 1784, the Treaty of Fort Stanwix was signed, which purported to establish a boundary between Native American lands and those ceded to the United States. However, this treaty was unilateral in nature, with American negotiators dictating terms to Native American leaders without genuinely considering their concerns or sovereignty. The treaty's provisions, which included the surrender of significant tracts of land to the United States, were met with widespread rejection by Native American tribes, who saw it as a blatant attempt to usurp their authority and disregard their rights. Little Turtle and Blue Jacket, recognizing the threat posed by American expansion, rallied their confederacy against the treaty's terms, arguing that the Ohio River should serve as the boundary between Native American lands and those claimed by the United States. This demand was rooted in a long-standing understanding that the river marked a natural dividing line between the territories of the Eastern Woodlands tribes and those of the Western Confederacy. However, American leaders, driven by a desire to expand their territory and assert their dominance, refused to recognize this boundary, instead insisting on the validity of the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. The conflict over the Ohio River boundary was further complicated by the limited authority of the Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation. Without a strong central government, American leaders struggled to present a unified front in negotiations with Native American tribes, leading to a patchwork of competing claims and contradictory policies. This weakness was exploited by Little Turtle and Blue Jacket, who skillfully played on the divisions within the American camp, seeking to drive a wedge between the federal government and the land-hungry settlers who were pushing westward. As tensions escalated, a series of skirmishes and raids broke out along the Ohio River, with American settlers and Native American warriors clashing over issues of territory and sovereignty. The Western Confederacy, emboldened by its growing strength and unity, began to launch more daring attacks on American settlements, seeking to assert its control over the region and deter further encroachment. Meanwhile, American leaders, faced with the reality of Native American resistance, were forced to confront the limitations of their own power and the fragility of their claim to the Northwest Territory. In 1785, a delegation of Native American leaders, including Little Turtle and Blue Jacket, traveled to New York City to meet with Congress, hoping to negotiate a more favorable treaty that would recognize their sovereignty and establish a clear boundary between their lands and those of the United States. However, the talks ultimately proved fruitless, as American leaders remained unwilling to compromise on the issue of land cessions or recognize Native American rights to self-governance. The failure of these negotiations marked a significant turning point in the Northwest Indian War, as it became clear that diplomacy alone would not be sufficient to resolve the deep-seated conflicts between Native American tribes and American settlers. As the diplomatic efforts between Native American leaders and Congress faltered, the Continental Congress turned its attention to establishing a governance structure for the Northwest Territory. In July 1787, the Northwest Ordinance was passed, which created a territorial government and outlined a framework for settlement and development. The ordinance divided the territory into 3 districts: the Eastern, Western, and Southern, each with its own governor, secretary, and judges. This move marked a significant shift in American policy, as it demonstrated a clear intention to assert control over the region and pave the way for widespread settlement. The Northwest Ordinance also established a land survey system, which would play a crucial role in shaping the territory's development. The system, designed by Thomas Hutchins, called for the division of land into rectangular townships, each consisting of 36 square miles. This grid-based approach would facilitate the sale and settlement of land, as well as provide a framework for infrastructure development. As the survey process got underway, American settlers began to flock to the region, drawn by the promise of fertile land and economic opportunity. Native American tribes, however, viewed the increased settler incursions with growing alarm. The Western Confederacy, still smarting from the failed negotiations in New York City, saw the Northwest Ordinance as a clear threat to their sovereignty. Little Turtle and Blue Jacket, along with other Native American leaders, began to mobilize their warriors, preparing for a potential conflict with American forces. Raids and skirmishes along the Ohio River increased in frequency, as Native American warriors sought to disrupt American settlement and assert their control over the region. Meanwhile, British officials in Canada watched the developments in the Northwest Territory with keen interest. Despite the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which had officially ended the Revolutionary War, many Britons still harbored ambitions for reclaiming their former territories. From their base in Canada, British agents and traders began to secretly encourage Native American resistance, providing arms, ammunition, and other supplies to tribes opposed to American expansion. This clandestine support would have significant consequences, as it helped to fuel the flames of conflict in the region and undermine American attempts to assert control. As the summer of 1790 approached, President Washington, faced with the escalating violence along the Ohio River, authorized military action to quell the Native American resistance and assert American control over the Northwest Territory. In response to the growing crisis, General Josiah Harmar, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, was appointed to lead an expedition north from Fort Washington, a strategic outpost located near present-day Cincinnati, Ohio. Harmar's mission was to destroy the Miami and Shawnee villages at Kekionga, a key stronghold of Native American resistance, and to demonstrate the power of the American military. In October 1790, Harmar set out with a force of approximately 1,500 men, consisting of regular army troops, militia, and frontiersmen. As they marched north, the Americans encountered numerous difficulties, including treacherous terrain, inclement weather, and skirmishes with Native American warriors. Despite these challenges, Harmar's forces pressed on, driven by a sense of determination and a desire to prove their mettle against the Native American tribes. On October 17, 1790, Harmar's expedition arrived at Kekionga, only to find that the Miami and Shawnee villages had been abandoned. However, the Native American warriors, led by Little Turtle and Blue Jacket, had not retreated far. Instead, they had set a trap for the Americans, using the terrain to their advantage. As Harmar's forces advanced, they were suddenly attacked from all sides by the Miami and Shawnee warriors, who had taken up positions in the surrounding woods and hills. The ensuing battle was a disaster for the Americans. Harmar's men, weighed down by their heavy equipment and hindered by the dense forest, were unable to respond effectively to the Native American tactics. The Miami and Shawnee warriors, on the other hand, were highly mobile and well acquainted with the terrain, allowing them to launch devastating attacks on the American flanks and rear. As the battle raged on, Harmar's forces became increasingly disorganized, and by the end of the day, they had suffered significant casualties and were in full retreat. The defeat at Kekionga was a major embarrassment for the American military, and it marked a significant turning point in the Northwest Indian War. The Miami and Shawnee tribes had demonstrated their ability to resist American expansion, and the U.S. government was forced to reassess its strategic approach to the region. In the aftermath of Harmar's defeat, President Washington and his advisors began to consider alternative approaches, including the possibility of negotiating a treaty with the Native American tribes or launching a more comprehensive military campaign to assert American control over the Northwest Territory. As the U.S. government reassessed its strategy following Harmar's defeat, President Washington appointed Governor Arthur St. Clair to lead a new expedition against the Native American tribes in the Northwest Territory. St. Clair, who had previously served as the governor of the territory, was tasked with assembling a force capable of crushing the Miami and Shawnee resistance once and for all. However, from the outset, St. Clair's campaign was marked by poor preparation and inadequate planning. In the summer of 1791, St. Clair set out from Fort Washington with a force of approximately 400 men, consisting of regular army troops, militia, and frontiersmen. Despite being aware of the lessons learned from Harmar's defeat, St. Clair failed to take necessary precautions, neglecting to scout ahead and gather intelligence on the Native American forces. As his army marched north, they were slowed by the treacherous terrain and inclement weather, which further exacerbated the difficulties of transporting supplies and equipment. Meanwhile, Little Turtle, the brilliant Miami leader, had been monitoring St. Clair's progress with great interest. Recognizing the opportunity to strike a decisive blow against the Americans, Little Turtle began to assemble a coalition of Native American warriors from various tribes, including the Shawnee, Delaware, and Potawatomi. With his forces gathered, Little Turtle devised a plan to ambush the American army as they approached the Wabash River. On November 4, 1791, St. Clair's army arrived at the Wabash River, where they began to construct a camp in preparation for crossing the river the following day. Unbeknownst to the Americans, Little Turtle's warriors had taken up positions on the surrounding hills and in the nearby woods, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the American sentries grew complacent and the main body of troops settled in for the night, Little Turtle gave the signal, and his warriors launched a devastating ambush. The attack caught the Americans completely off guard, with many soldiers still asleep or unaware of the impending danger. The Native American warriors, armed with muskets, bows, and tomahawks, poured down from the hills and burst from the woods, cutting through the American lines with ease. St. Clair's men, disorganized and leaderless, were quickly overwhelmed, and their camp was transformed into a scene of utter chaos. As the battle raged on, Little Turtle's leadership and tactical brilliance became apparent. He had carefully planned the ambush to exploit the weaknesses of the American army, using the terrain to funnel the enemy into killing zones and targeting the American officers and artillery. The result was a catastrophic defeat for the Americans, with estimates suggesting that over 600 soldiers were killed or wounded, representing more than 60% of St. Clair's force. As the news of St. Clair's disastrous defeat spread, President Washington and his administration faced intense criticism and pressure to take decisive action against the Native American tribes in the Northwest Territory. In response, Secretary of War Henry Knox proposed a radical overhaul of the military strategy, advocating for the creation of a new, elite force that would be capable of defeating the Native American Confederacy once and for all. This proposal led to the formation of the Legion of the United States, a specially designed unit that would combine infantry, artillery, and cavalry elements into a single, highly mobile and flexible force. In January 1792, General Anthony Wayne, a seasoned veteran of the Revolutionary War and a skilled military commander, was appointed to lead the new legion. Wayne, known for his bravery and tactical genius, was tasked with transforming the raw recruits and veterans into a cohesive and effective fighting machine. He implemented an intensive training program, which included rigorous drill exercises, tactical maneuvers, and combat simulations. The recruits were also schooled in wilderness survival skills, such as tracking, hunting, and navigation, to prepare them for the unforgiving environment of the Northwest Territory. As the Legion trained, Wayne developed a forward strategy that emphasized the importance of securing key territories and building strategic forts to serve as bases of operation. One such fort was Fort Greenville, which would become a crucial hub for the Legion's operations in the region. Located near the present-day city of Greenville, Ohio, the fort was situated at the confluence of the Great Miami and Stillwater rivers, providing access to the heart of Native American territory. Wayne envisioned Fort Greenville as a launching point for his campaigns against the Native American Confederacy, and he invested significant resources in its construction and defense. Despite the preparations for war, there were still those who advocated for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. In 1792, a delegation of Native American leaders, including representatives from the Miami, Shawnee, and Delaware tribes, met with American officials to discuss the possibility of a treaty. However, these overtures were ultimately rejected by the Native American Confederacy, which remained committed to resisting American expansion. The rejection of these peace offers marked a turning point in the conflict, as both sides began to prepare for a decisive showdown. As the Legion of the United States prepared to take the field in 1794, General Anthony Wayne's methodical approach to campaigning became apparent. He understood that a successful advance into Native American territory required a secure supply line, and to achieve this, he ordered the construction of a series of forts to protect his lines of communication and logistics. The first of these, Fort Recovery, was established in June 1794, near the site of St. Clair's disastrous defeat 3 years earlier. This strategic location allowed Wayne to anchor his left flank and provide a safe haven for his troops as they pushed north into the heart of Native American country. The construction of Fort Recovery was not without its challenges, as Native American warriors, still smarting from their recent victories, began to harass the American troops with skirmishes and raids. On June 30, 1794, a force of about 200 Native Americans attacked a party of American soldiers who were gathering timber for the fort's construction. The Americans, although outnumbered, held their ground, and after a fierce engagement, the Native Americans retreated, leaving behind several dead and wounded. This preliminary skirmish set the tone for the campaign to come, as Wayne's men demonstrated their resolve and determination to press on despite the dangers that lay ahead. As the summer of 1794 wore on, Wayne's Legion continued its advance north, constructing forts and securing key territories along the way. Fort Adams, established in July, provided a vital link between Fort Recovery and the Maumee River, while Fort Defiance, built in August, served as a forward base for operations against the Native American Confederacy. The British, who had long been suspected of secretly supporting the Native American cause, now faced increasing pressure from the American government to cease their involvement. In July 1794, the British commander at Fort Miami's, Lieutenant Governor Simcoe, received orders from London to avoid any direct confrontation with the Americans, effectively ending British support for the Native American forces. The implications of this decision were significant, as the Native American Confederacy, which had long relied on British aid and supplies, now found itself facing the American army alone. The loss of British support also created divisions within the Native American leadership, as some chiefs, such as Blue Jacket of the Shawnee, began to question the wisdom of continued resistance in the face of overwhelming American military power. As Wayne's Legion pressed on, the stage was set for a decisive confrontation between the Americans and the Native American Confederacy, one that would ultimately determine the fate of the Northwest Territory and shape the course of American history. In August 1794, Wayne's army, now bolstered by the presence of several hundred Kentucky militiamen, resumed its advance north, intent on bringing the Native American forces to battle. The Americans marched through a landscape of rolling hills, dense forests, and winding rivers, their scouts and spies providing vital intelligence on the movements and dispositions of the enemy. As they approached the Maumee River, the Legion encountered increasing signs of Native American activity, including abandoned villages and freshly dug earthworks. It was clear that the Native Americans were preparing to make a stand, and Wayne's men steeled themselves for the battle ahead, knowing that the fate of the campaign, and perhaps the entire region, hung in the balance. As the Legion of the United States approached the Maumee River on August 20, 1794, Native American warriors led by Blue Jacket of the Shawnee prepared the battlefield for an ambush. The terrain, a dense forest with fallen trees and underbrush, was ideal for a surprise attack. The Native Americans had carefully selected this site, known as Fallen Timbers, to funnel the American army into a killing zone. They had spent hours constructing earthworks and felling trees to create a maze of obstacles, hoping to negate the American advantage in firepower and discipline. General Anthony Wayne, anticipating an ambush, had taken precautions to protect his flanks and rear. He deployed his men in a compact, defensive formation, with the Kentucky militiamen on the right flank and the regular army troops on the left. As the Americans advanced through the forest, they were suddenly met with a hail of gunfire and arrows from the Native American positions. The ambush had begun, but Wayne's tactical response was swift and decisive. He ordered his men to hold their ground and return fire, while he personally led a contingent of troops to outflank the Native American positions. The battle raged on for nearly 2 hours, with both sides exchanging volleys of gunfire and arrows. However, the American discipline and training eventually began to tell, as they slowly but steadily pushed forward through the fallen trees and underbrush. The Native Americans, despite their bravery, were unable to withstand the relentless American advance. As the battle reached its climax, Wayne's men emerged from the forest and into a clearing, where they found the Native American warriors in full retreat. The decisive American victory at Fallen Timbers was marked by the pursuit of the fleeing Native Americans, who abandoned their earthworks and equipment as they fled towards the British fort at Fort Miami. However, when they arrived at the fort, they were met with a surprise. The British commander, Lieutenant Governor Simcoe, refused to grant them sanctuary. Fearing American reprisals and eager to avoid a confrontation, the British had decided to abandon their Native American allies. The warriors, exhausted and demoralized, were forced to continue their retreat, leaving behind many of their wounded and dead. As the winter of 1795 set in, General Anthony Wayne's army settled into their winter quarters, established at Fort Greenville, a strategically located outpost that would serve as a focal point for the upcoming negotiations with the Native American tribes. The harsh weather conditions and scarcity of resources made it difficult for the Native American warriors to continue their resistance, and many began to realize that their best option was to negotiate a peace treaty with the Americans. Meanwhile, Wayne's army used the winter months to regroup, reorganize, and prepare for the upcoming negotiations. In January 1795, a delegation of Native American leaders, including representatives from the Shawnee, Miami, and Delaware tribes, arrived at Fort Greenville to initiate talks with General Wayne. The atmosphere was tense, but both sides were determined to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. The Native American leaders, aware of their weakened position, were willing to make concessions in exchange for an end to the violence and a guarantee of their safety. Wayne, on the other hand, was under pressure from the American government to secure a favorable treaty that would provide for the expansion of American territory and the protection of American settlers. After weeks of intense negotiations, the two sides reached a tentative agreement. The Treaty of Greenville, signed on August 3, 1795, marked a significant turning point in the history of the region. The Native American tribes agreed to cede large tracts of land to the United States, including much of present-day Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. In return, the Americans promised to provide the Native Americans with annual payments of $9,500 and to establish a series of trading posts where they could exchange goods and services. The treaty also established the Greenville Line, a boundary that marked the western edge of American settlement and provided a temporary buffer zone between the Americans and the Native American tribes. The Treaty of Greenville had far-reaching consequences for the Native American tribes. While it brought an end to the violence and provided some economic benefits, it also marked the beginning of a long period of decline and dispossession. The territorial concessions made by the Native American leaders would ultimately lead to the loss of their land, their autonomy, and their way of life. As the Americans continued to expand westward, the Native American tribes would be forced to adapt to a new reality, one in which they were increasingly marginalized and excluded from the decision-making process. The payments and trade agreements established by the Treaty of Greenville also had significant implications for the Native American economy. The annual payments, while providing some financial support, also created a system of dependency that would ultimately undermine the Native American tribes' ability to self-sufficiency. The trading posts, meanwhile, became centers of cultural exchange, but also facilitated the spread of European diseases and the exploitation of Native American resources. As the years went by, the Native American tribes would struggle to maintain their sovereignty in the face of increasing American pressure, and the Treaty of Greenville would come to be seen as a milestone on the road to their dispossession. As the Treaty of Greenville took effect, the Northwest Territory began to open up to American settlement, with thousands of pioneers streaming into the region, eager to stake their claims on the fertile land. The treaty's provisions, including the establishment of the Greenville Line, provided a temporary buffer zone between the Americans and the Native American tribes, but it was clear that this was only a temporary reprieve. The Jay Treaty, signed in 1794, had already set in motion the withdrawal of British forces from their frontier posts, removing a major obstacle to American expansion. The British withdrawal, however, also created a power vacuum that would be filled by a new generation of Native American leaders, including the charismatic and formidable Tecumseh. A Shawnee warrior and statesman, Tecumseh had risen to prominence in the years following the Treaty of Greenville, rallying his people against the encroaching American settlers and advocating for a return to traditional ways. He saw the treaty as a betrayal, a surrender of sacred land and sovereignty, and he vowed to resist its provisions with every fiber of his being. As American settlers poured into the Northwest Territory, Tecumseh's resistance movement gained momentum, with raids and skirmishes becoming increasingly common along the frontier. The Americans, meanwhile, were determined to assert their claim to the land, and tensions escalated into a series of violent confrontations. In 1799, the U.S. government established the Indiana Territory, which included much of present-day Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan, further solidifying American control over the region. The seeds of future conflict were sown in these years as Tecumseh's movement gained support from other Native American tribes and even some British agents who saw an opportunity to undermine American expansion. The stage was set for a larger confrontation, one that would eventually lead to the War of 1812. In the meantime, the Northwest Territory continued to attract settlers, with the population growing rapidly as the region's economy expanded. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States, providing new opportunities for westward expansion and further straining relations between the Americans and the Native American tribes. Tecumseh's resistance movement continued to gain momentum, with the Shawnee leader traveling extensively throughout the region, rallying support and forging alliances with other tribes. By 1808, tensions along the frontier had reached a boiling point, with skirmishes and raids becoming increasingly frequent. The American government, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated with Tecumseh's resistance, and in 1809, Governor William Henry Harrison of the Indiana Territory launched a series of military campaigns against the Shawnee, hoping to crush the movement once and for all. The Northwest Indian War marked a pivotal moment in American history as the young nation struggled to assert its authority over the vast and untamed territories beyond the Appalachian Mountains. The conflict's outcome, though ultimately a victory for the Americans, came at great cost to the Native American tribes, who were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands and relegated to the margins of society. As we reflect on this tumultuous period, we are reminded that the legacy of the Northwest Indian War continues to shape our understanding of the complex and often fraught relationship between the United States government and the indigenous peoples of North America. The war's impact can still be felt today, a testament to the enduring power of history to inform and haunt us. And so, as we close this chapter on the Northwest Indian War, we are left to ponder the profound consequences of conquest and the unyielding spirit of resistance that has defined the Native American experience. Thank you for joining me on this journey through military history. Until next time, I'm General Biography, reminding you to keep marching toward victory.